Are the LA Kings the biggest losers of free agency so far? Or does new GM Ken Holland have an idea that we just can't see yet? Let's talk about it on a season preview edition of Locked On NHL Game Night.
When that final horn sounds, you know it's time for Locked On NHL Game Night. All the post-game reactions to every game across the league, every single night, with insights only the hosts at Locked On can provide. Prepare to experience game day reactions like never before. Only on Locked On NHL Game Night. Your team every day.
Hello there, hockey fans, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Game Night with a little bit of a twist as we are previewing all 32 NHL teams, bringing you up to the 2025-2026 NHL season. We will have you covered like nobody else, hearing from your local experts every week up until the start of the season. I'm your host, Cam Stuart, a Boston Bruins fan in Chicagoland. Joining me, another Locked On NHL Game Night host, but here for his LA Kings duties, Locked On LA Kings host, Eddie Garcia out in Hollywoodland. And Eddie, it's kind of the same story for the Kings. You know, a very good team, maybe didn't live up to their expectations because they get the Oilers in the first round for the fourth year in a row. So we're going to look at how they get past that. We're going to look at their free agency so far. And maybe Ken Holland's just got a plan here, and we're all on the puppet strings, just falling for what the media is saying about it so far. But Eddie, we're in the month of July. It's been all free agency, really the last couple of weeks since the NHL draft has been up and since the Stanley Cup final has been up. And I've already said it, I'm a Bruins fan, so I'm right here with you in this boat, Eddie, because it's the Bruins and it's the Kings that are seen at the bottom of these lists or at the top of the biggest loser list for free agency so far. Just about a week into it, Eddie, thoughts so far on the LA Kings and how free agency has gone so far?
Well, briefly, real quick, if you're watching on YouTube, Cam is wearing a gorgeous Wayne Gretzky throwback LA Kings jersey, which is fantastic. So that is making me feel very welcome here for this edition of Locked On LA Game Night. Yes, I certainly can understand very much from the outside looking in why a lot of people would think that the LA Kings were one of the bigger losers in free agency. There were certainly no impact players that were signed. No, nothing that's going to blow you away, that's for sure. And they also lost their best defenseman from last season, Vladislav Gavrikov, who goes to the New York Rangers in free agency, which was certainly a pretty big blow. So I get it. The additions were definitely additions to fill specific needs, but the contracts given out were not great. In terms of dollars and term, and the players they brought in, you can certainly sell that they've gotten older and slower. The Kings would spin it that they've gotten bigger and more experienced. In the end, we'll see how it works out. But when you've lost in the first round 4 years in a row to the same team, obviously you've got to do something a little different. I think there's a lot of people that would have wished that it was some bigger, more flashy additions. Mitch Marner was supposedly in the conversation. I totally get why he'd pick Vegas over LA for a number of reasons. And there is that real question about, is LA a destination? And it's a question that is multi-layered. The Kings in free agency historically have never landed a big time free agent. And when you live in LA, and you see the Lakers, and you see the Dodgers, and you see the things they do, Shohei Ohtani, Luka Doncic, stars, right? LA. Look, as you know, wearing that jersey, the Kings maybe made the biggest trade in NHL history. So the trades are there. They trade well, but free agency, it just never works out for the Kings, and it didn't work out as far as getting a big name this time around as well.
And it feels like it's coming to a point where you're at that point as a franchise where you do need to bring in some free agents, because the Kings have done pretty much everything else right. You know, they've made savvy moves, they've drafted well, they've developed very well. And yet here they are a couple of pieces away and they're on the big losers list. And it's a real coincidence that Tanner Jeannot walks in free agency and for a couple of hours, maybe an hour, has the worst free agent contract of the cycle, leaving the LA Kings and signing a 5-year deal with the Bruins. And then it's all of a sudden $8.5 million next year into what could be a third pairing. I know you've got Brian Dumoulin up on the second pairing for your line charts. What is going on there? Cody, Cece, Brian Dumoulin. I know you're feeling better about the Dumoulin piece than a lot of other Kings fans are, but that's a lot of money to try and make up for Vladislav Gavrikov, and you don't really get a ton of talent back. Certainly in the case of Cody Cece, the guy's bouncing around. I don't know what the market was for him.
I don't either, but he always seems to get a good deal somewhere, wherever he goes. It's one of those mysteries of the NHL that this guy always seems to land on his feet, and there's always some GM out there. Well, a couple of times it's been Ken Holland because
he's got pictures of Ken Holland somewhere.
Maybe. He always seems to kind of land on his feet. But look, the defense for the Kings is not as good as it was a year ago because Gavrikov is gone. That's just the bottom line. You could certainly debate, and I don't know that we've gotten a clear answer. I don't know if we'll ever get a clear answer on why he decided to go to New York. Was it because he's got friends there in Artemi Panarin and Igor Shesterkin, some of his countrymen? It's been talked about that, it's closer to Russia where he's home, and it's, you're flying a little bit less than when you go visit home. Maybe the climate is a little bit more like where he's used to coming from. There's a large Russian community in New York. People are trying to throw a lot of things out there to try to figure out why. Because he leaves a good team that has a structure defensively that fits what he does for a team that at least last year wasn't as good and terrible defensively. But he goes there, and I guess he's the guy now that Keandre Miller is gone. Maybe that's appealing to him. I don't know. It's really weird because when Rob Blake was still the GM, and he doesn't talk about contracts during the season, and it was brought up, and he talked very positively about being able to re-sign Gavrikov, almost like that all the talks they had were really positive. And then he gets let go. Gavrikov gets a new agent. The exit interview, he says, yeah, there's no rush. We're fine. And then next thing you know, we're like, he's going to New York. And the money they offered him, I got to believe the Kings would have matched the $7 million a year. I thought he was going to get 9.5. And I guess the years could have been what the Kings didn't want to invest in. And I get it. But if they're in it to win it now, we'll worry about year 5, 6, and 7 when it happens. If they think their window is now to do something, then who cares? Sign your best defenseman and then tweak from there. But that didn't happen. I think Dumoulin's okay. He's definitely a downgrade. And again, it's just for now. We're just talking about next season. And Cody Cece on the third pairing, I think is okay. They wanted to get bigger and more experienced on the back end. And they did do that. Now, are they, they let go Jordan Spence. They traded him to Ottawa for a couple of picks. He's a young puck mover, but he's small and not physical. They replaced him with a slower, bigger guy that hopefully can be more relied upon in playoff hockey. We'll see. It's all going to depend on how it works out in the playoffs.
Yeah, so kind of going into that to close out the segment here, going bigger and maybe slower and for postseason hockey, is that the way to go in the Western Conference now? Obviously, the Kings losing to the same team for 4 straight years. It's you're basically hyper-focused on beating one team with the playoff structure, but is that the way to win in the postseason in 2026?
I don't know. We'll find out. They obviously believe it is. And I know, how it is, copycat league and all sports. They see Florida, they see a big, strong, physical team, and then everybody wants to do that. And I get it. But obviously the Kings are not the Florida Panthers. I just watching the finals, it was hard not to think, man, we are not close to these guys at all. But that's what their thinking is. We'll see. I don't know. I understand. The problem was one of the components for the Kings in losing the Oilers this year was how the bench was used. Jim Hiller basically, when it got to crunch time, rolled out 3 lines, completely ignored the 4th line, and played 4.5 defensemen. And you get that to a point, but again, I'll go to the Florida Panthers, roll 4 lines, come at the other team, wear them down. And the Kings were the team that got worn down in the playoffs. So if Cody Cece is a guy that Ken Holland thinks that he can rely on to throw out there, at least to help your team not get too worn out defensively, because he wasn't playing Jordan Spence in the playoffs, I mean, at all. So if that translates to a better formula, because you're rolling 4 lines and the team can have a little more energy, because against the Oilers in game 5, it's 2-2, you're home, and they had nothing. They just had no gas left in the tank, and then they end up losing that game, and that's the series. So that's their thinking, to be a kind of a deeper team that is, veteran players that he can trust more in bigger moments, and hopefully that's the difference this time around.
Let's talk about that 4th line. Let's talk about those depth guys. Let's talk about the one player that LA Kings superfan Eddie Garcia will never root for. Let's talk about him next on Locked On NHL Game Night. But first, let's talk about Monarch Money, proud sponsor of today's episode of Locked On NHL Game Night. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? Well, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. If you think Monarch Money is just a budgeting app, you could not be more wrong, okay? It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. And unlike all these streaming services, you can actually just nail it down to one place. I don't know about you guys, but I'm sick of having to go in between apps and websites and services. Monarch Money, all your accounts tracked in one place. Even if you're sharing accounts with a loved one or a partner, you can track those right there as well. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Back here on a season preview edition of Locked On NHL Game Night, Locked On LA Kings host Eddie Garcia joining me. I'm Cam Stuart. Eddie, we talked about some of the free agent signings. We talked about how the Kings needed to bolster that 4th line and that bottom 6. Well, they got a lightning rod of a free agent signing and knocked out a spot on the 4th line with the signing of Corey Perry, much maligned amongst LA Kings fans, yourself very much included. I would love to hear about your reaction and your wife's reaction to signing Corey Perry.
Yeah, she is not a Corey Perry fan either, and so I was in my office where I'm at right now, in my little home office where I have my studio. And I was watching all the goings on in free agency. So I'm, right there along with everyone else, seeing what my team does. And it wasn't a total shock, because we knew the Kings would like to add a player like him. And I guess a lot of teams would like to add a player like Corey Perry, a guy who mucks it up, is somebody that, is an agitator. The other team has to think about him. Maybe they, take some penalties against him, things like that. So it wasn't, of course we were thinking, a little bit, over our skis, Sam Bennett, Brad Marchand, let's get somebody like that. And one of our listeners did bring up Corey Perry. And of course I was like, oh no, I get what you're saying, but no, not that guy. So it wasn't 100%. Oh my God, I can't believe this. But when I saw Corey Perry to the Kings, I just kind of closed my eyes and put my head down and was like, oh man, this really happened. So I shouted out to my wife in the other room. I said, hey, the Kings just signed Corey Perry. And her quote was, oh, F that, end quote. Of course, it was not just F, it was the other word. But yeah, I for Kings fans of a certain age that remember well Corey Perry at Anaheim and just the pain in the ass that he was, and of course Edmonton as well. If you talk about the 2 most hated teams for Kings fans, I think most of them would say Edmonton and Anaheim. Mm-hmm. So for him to come here, like thinking about him in that uniform just makes me sick. And I get the signing. I understand the reasoning behind it. and some fans and friends of mine have said, how could Ken Holland be so out of touch with the fan base? I'm like, he can't. When you're signing players, you can't worry about what are the fans going to react, how are they going to react to that. You know what I mean? He's not from here. He just got here. I'm not saying he's completely ignorant on, Anaheim and LA and the rivalry and all that, but he's trying to make the Kings the best team that he can be. And if he feels like this player can do that, then he's going to do it. So I don't blame him, or I don't think he's, tone deaf as far as that kind of thing goes. And if you're a younger Kings fan, if you don't really remember Corey Perry that much in Anaheim, you remember him being a guy who bounces around every team and they always go to the finals or whatever and lose. Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Yeah. But I think like I said, for Kings fans of a certain age who remember Corey Perry in his heyday with the Ducks, it's really hard to swallow. It's really hard to think of that guy on your team. And I think the players will embrace it. I know Drew Doughty's already reached out to him. I think guys like him, they just want to win. And if they think he can help them win, they're willing to put all that stuff behind them. But for a lot of fans, I'm really, really going to be interested to see when he gets introduced on opening night. I got to believe there's going to be some boos. There's got to be some boos. And think about that, right? I mean, opening night, it's the start of a season. You're all excited. And, and I would imagine he would expect it and maybe would kind of grin a little bit at it. He knows he's got to do some stuff to win over the fans, but I don't know if he's going to be able to do it or not because there's too much history there.
He's won over Ken Holland, and it's been an interesting tenure so far for Ken Holland as the LA Kings GM, obviously with all the success he's had in the past. It almost feels like I'm looking at it from an outside perspective, Eddie. I don't get to watch a lot of games living in the Midwest and the East Coast, but seeing this Kings team play over the last couple of years, you can tell they're pretty close. They've just gone up against a powerhouse in the Oilers the last couple of years. And so Ken Holland almost feels like a gun for hire here of like, he went to the Oilers in 2019 or so. And it was like, we've got two generational players. We're ready to start making some deep playoff runs, build us a team. And while the Kings have felt like they've been built for that, it hasn't come to fruition. Is that kind of the feeling of Ken Holland coming in here, getting the final pieces, whether we like it or not, whether the national media likes it or not, but making us a better playoff team? Is that what this all boils down to?
100%. That's all it is. And we've certainly come to realize that, the regular season is just to get you to the playoffs. And again, I'll keep pointing at the Florida Panthers, but, they didn't care at all where they finished in the standings. Yep. All they thought was get in the playoffs and we'll do our thing. And that's it. And it's exactly what they did. They didn't have home ice advantage in any round of the playoffs. Yep. So that's kind of the Kings mentality, what it needs to be. Everything they do in the regular season is focused to prepare them for the playoffs. No playoff wins since winning the Cup in 2014. 5 series out in the first round every time, last 4 to Edmonton. So it's all about getting past the Oilers and seeing what happens. Because, they could very well meet him again in the first round. It would not surprise me one bit. And so, yeah, that's the focus, constructing a team that can be more successful in the playoffs. Regular season, hey, if they do well, that's great. But it's certainly not the focus.
And so far, of course, while the moves haven't been entirely popular, these are guys who have played a lot of playoff hockey. Shoot, Corey Perry just laces up his skates and goes to the Stanley Cup final every year. So let's talk about the playoffs. Let's talk about the boogeymen up there in Edmonton, Alberta, and how the LA Kings will get past the Edmonton Oilers in the 2026 postseason. Let's do it next on Locked On NHL Game Night. Third period, Locked On NHL Game Night season preview. Cam Stuart here with Eddie Garcia of Locked On LA Kings. So before we talk about the big bad Edmonton Oilers, Eddie, because I know that's your favorite thing to talk about, let's look at the Kings first. We've talked about some moves. We know where they were at last year. We know how close they were to getting over that hump of the first round last year. Are the LA Kings better looking at 25-26 than they were last season?
I don't know that they're better. They hope they are, but I get what they're trying to do. We talked about it earlier, right? Using your entire bench, hoping that's a component of the solution. I do think the Kings have improved their fourth line from a year ago with Corey Perry, with Joel Armia, who we didn't talk about, who they brought in from Montreal. The center position, don't know if it'll be either Alex Turcotte or Samuel Hellenius, but we'll see. I don't know that either of them are, it's going to be that big of a difference. They both bring different things to the table, but I think the fourth line is better. So that's a part of it. Dumoulin and Edmondson, they're kind of two sides of the same coin, I would say. But I got Dumoulin at the second pairing on the left side and Edmondson on the third, but that could be interchangeable. And then I think we talked about Cody Cece. I got to believe he's on the third pairing because Brandt Clark, it's time for him to start to get more responsibility. He was a high draft pick. He is an offensive defenseman, which the Kings mostly have a bunch of defensive defensemen. He's a creative guy. They asked him last year, show us you can be a solid defensive player at the NHL level. He did that. And now it's time for them to return the favor and say, okay, you proved to us that you can do what we've asked you. Now we're going to take some of the constraints off of you and let you be more creative and let you be more impactful. He can't do that as a third pairing guy. So I have to believe, because they've been open about wanting to do that with him, he'll be the second pairing guy and Cece will be on the third pairing. I think they'll be okay defensively if they do that. And yes, losing Vladislav Gavrikov is a blow, but the Kings are a good team defense. It's not just about their defensemen. Their forwards are all, back checkers, very responsible defensively. So it's more of a team thing with them. I think they can absorb losing a guy like Gavrikov and be okay with it because of the parts of the team defensively. So better fourth line, a more trustworthy veteran third pairing defenseman with Cece, and they think these little tweaks will help to get them over the hump against the Oilers or whoever it may be.
Yeah. And for Clark too, it feels like there's been some, organizational expectations as well as fan expectations of like, let's see what more this kid can do almost. Like, let's give him more of a shot here. And certainly that would fit more into, like, if we're talking about 2026, it would make more sense to have Clark up on your second pairing and Cody Cece on your third, but that is a guy that Ken Holland clearly loves. I want to ask you something that I promise is a question about the future, but it takes us looking back at a kind of a painful near past here, Eddie. What went wrong in the final four games of the Edmonton series? You had talked a little bit about being gassed, and maybe that's just the quick answer. There was the challenge and everything kind of going wrong in those first two games up in Edmonton. But how did that kind of slip away?
Well, I think what we've talked about was a big part of it. You can't go up against the Oilers. And look, going into the series, I thought the Kings were the deeper team. And to Edmonton's credit, guys like Evander Kane got dropped into the lineup after missing the whole regular season, and he was impactful. Guys like Trent Frederick eventually in the series found his footing coming back from an injury, and he was impactful. So the depth that I thought the Kings had didn't turn out to be the advantage that we thought it was, because some of the other Oilers stepped up. Certainly, you look at the Kings' strategy in games 3 and 4 when they had a lead in the third period on the road and they take their foot completely off the gas and allowed the Oilers to kind of do whatever they wanted, just hoping that we could hold on and win those games. It's just, you can't play that kind of hockey, especially against a quality opponent like that. So I think that kind of goes back to the trust as well, as far as the players you're putting out there and what you're asking them to do. Jim Hiller has received a ton of heat for the way he coached that team in the postseason, for the challenge that he had. And I think he goes into this season with a boss who didn't hire him on an extremely short leash. So, the pressure's on him for sure. If they get off to a terrible start, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's fired. And this is a guy who guided the Kings to a franchise record-tying number of wins and points last year in his first full year as an NHL head coach. So if you look at that in a vacuum, you're like, man, what an amazing job he did in the regular season. And then you go to the playoffs and you see how the lineup was used, the challenge, the strategy that was put in, and you're like, this guy gets an F. This guy's in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing. So, yeah, he's going to be on the hot seat for sure. And, he's been given apparently, what the Kings feel like is the difference. Now he's got to go out and make sure it's implemented properly.
And look, hey, I'm just throwing this out there. If it's not Jim Hiller at some point this season, there's a coach who's taken a California team to a Stanley Cup final. It's the same coach who lost to the LA Kings in a Stanley Cup final. Pete DeBoer is out there. He's not the easiest to deal with, as we have found out. The goaltenders really don't like him, but he's going to be available. And so I think that's for a lot of teams who are on borrowed time with their coaches are going to be talking about that as we get closer to the season. But Eddie, this is a season preview show. So now, having said that, we've gone over the moves. We've gone over why they didn't get over that first round hump last year. Where do you see things falling for the Kings in the division this year? And if you so dare, how far do you see them going in the postseason as we sit in mid-July?
Well, I can't see them finishing higher than third. Vegas, obviously, I mean, look, the path most likely for the Kings to go where they want to go is through Edmonton and Vegas.
You took 10 playoff goals from Edmonton. I'm just saying. You took 10 playoff goals from them.
Yeah.
Corey Perry.
I know. But you've got McDavid and Draisaitl.
Yeah,
you've got Eichel and Marner. I mean, the Kings cannot. I love Adrian Kempe. I think he's a very underrated player, but the Kings cannot match up, weapons for weapons against those two teams. It's got to be an entire team effort to get them to where they want to go. Like, everyone's got to contribute. Everyone's got to do their job. Everyone's got to perform up to expectations. And guys like Quentin Byfield and Brant Clark, the younger guys, they have to take a step forward. They have to start to have some ownership of this team a little bit, especially Byfield. When you're the second overall pick, high expectations. He took a step last year. He needs to take another step this year. So I think they're still a playoff team. I think at worst they're a wild card team, but I don't know how anyone can believe in the team in the playoffs until they show it. We hope that these tweaks will help be part of the solution. We hope the head coach has learned his lessons from last season and can be a wiser, better coach going forward. But if they match up in the first round with Edmonton or Vegas, I don't know how anyone would pick the Kings to win that matchup. Until they prove it, I completely understand all the skepticism, and I think Kings fans are right there along with everyone else.
There's a world where the Kings face off as a wild card team against like the President's Trophy winning Dallas Stars, and Kings fans are just rejoicing that it's not Edmonton or Vegas. Yeah. I think there's a real possibility of that happening. Eddie, thank you so much for hopping on. Of course, as always, for those who haven't tuned in before, tell the people where they can find you.
You can find us 5 days a week. Off-season, regular season at Locked On LA Kings. If you do a Google search, make sure you put in the LA, because we don't want you going off to a NBA team in Northern California that you may have heard about, or maybe not. I don't know. But yeah, Locked On LA Kings, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.
And Eddie, of course, will be part of our Locked On NHL Game Night team again, which we will preview all 32 teams in this league going division by division. So this is a little taste of the Pacific. Eddie will have you covered in the Metro and the Central as well with Shukri Wright. So stick along through all of that throughout the entire offseason. We're here to get you through the summer, folks. Okay, we're going to do that if nothing else. So be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel. We're bringing you nothing but NHL news 5 days a week on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts as well. And we will see you on the next one on Locked On NHL Game Night.